Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Rain pounded against the foggy windows of Bluebird Cafe, creating a steady rhythm, as if the sky itself were tapping out a mournful beat for an evening already steeped in gloom. Inside, the golden glow of lamps fell across polished wooden tables, the scent of coffee mingling with the aroma of freshly baked butter pastries, offering a warmth that starkly contrasted with the chill outside. Grace sat alone by the window, wearing the red dress she had spent an hour choosing in front of the mirror. It had made her stand out, given her confidence, but now it felt like armor that couldn't protect her trembling heart. On the table lay her phone, face down, set only to vibrate. 45 minutes had passed since the agreed meeting time. She exhaled softly, her fingers unconsciously brushing the edge of her ear, where two tiny hearing aids rested. To others, they might appear to be signs of a defect. But to Grace, they were the only bridge keeping her connected to the world of sound, a world she once feared she would lose forever. Working as a pediatric nurse had never been easy, especially for someone with moderate to severe hearing loss. But Grace had proven to all her colleagues that she was capable. She could read lips, pick up body language, and above all, she had a patient heart. Children trusted her, parents admired her, and yet in love, things were different. 2 years ago, the man she had dated the longest had left her with just one curt sentence: "You're too complicated." It was a knife that severed her trust, leaving behind a scar that throbbed every time she remembered it. Since then, Grace had hesitated to date again, but tonight she had given herself another chance. She wanted to believe that somewhere, someone would see her value, not her flaws. The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of damp, cold air. A man stepped inside, his coat soaked through with water. Grace recognized him immediately. Brandon, her blind date, the man she had been chatting with all week on a dating app. He walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat down without a single word of apology. His gaze flicked across her face before settling on her ears and the small devices there. "You're Grace?" he asked, his tone dry. "Yes, thank you for coming." She tried to keep her smile steady, speaking slowly so he could clearly see her lips, an old habit by now. Brandon opened the menu, leaning back, but his eyes narrowed as they lingered on her. "Wait, are you really like that?" Grace gently placed her hand on the table. "I have moderate to severe hearing loss. I mentioned it clearly in my profile. I can hear with hearing aids, and I read lips quite well." Brandon gave a short, dismissive laugh, his eyes flashing with irritation. "I thought you meant like, sometimes you need things repeated. I didn't know you were actually like this." He lifted his fingers, making exaggerated air quotes as if mocking. "Hearing difficulties." A chill ran down Grace's spine. She tightened her grip on her water glass to keep her hands from shaking. "That doesn't stop me from living or working normally. I'm a pediatric nurse. I graduated with honors but have you thought about what it's like going out to dinner, talking, meeting my friends?" Brandon cut in, his voice growing harsher. "Do you know how awkward that would be? My friends would laugh their heads off if I brought a girlfriend who needs everything repeated. Honestly, I can't date like this." Grace felt her heart shatter into pieces. Even though she had braced herself for the worst, the pain was sharp, just like the first rejection. She lifted her chin, straightened her back, clinging to the last shred of dignity. "You can think whatever you want, but hearing loss does not define who I am." Brandon pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the wooden floor, drawing stares from nearby tables. He shrugged. "No offense, but I have my own standards. Good luck next time." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Grace behind in the cold emptiness and the sympathetic glances of strangers. Grace sat still, her eyes fixed on the glass of water in her hand, her breathing unsteady. She didn't cry. She wouldn't let herself cry. But deep inside, Brandon's words cut like blades, twisting into an old wound. Too complicated, disabled, not enough. Outside, the rain continued to fall, merging with the soft strains of jazz drifting through the cafe. In the warm room, surrounded by the low murmur of conversations, Grace's heart once again found itself utterly alone. The door of Bluebird Cafe slammed shut behind Brandon, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. Grace sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the empty space before her. She could hear the faint whispers around her, feel the pitying glances slide her way. That hurt more than the cruel words just spoken, but at a table only a few steps away, a man had witnessed the entire scene from the beginning. Benjamin Thorne, in his mid-30s, tall and lean in a dark shirt, sat with his young daughter. On their table lay a coloring book filled with bright dinosaurs, crayons scattered across the surface. Lucy, 6 years old, with wide, round eyes and a tiny hearing aid glinting under the light, had long since stopped coloring. She watched the woman sitting alone at the next table, her beautiful face shadowed by eyes brimming with tears. "Daddy," Lucy tugged gently at her father's sleeve, her small hands moving clumsily in the air, with gestures full of worry. Why was that man so mean to the pretty lady? Benjamin swallowed hard, his jaw clenched so tightly it seemed his teeth might crack. He placed his large, warm hand over his daughter's, answering in sign language. "Because some people don't understand, sweetheart. Some people aren't kind." He had meant to stop there. He could have simply sat still, taught his daughter a small lesson about the world's cruelty, and continued their dinner. But Grace's eyes, the way she held her head high, with forced pride while her trembling hands clutched the glass of water, made it impossible for him to remain seated. Benjamin rose. Lucy looked up, curious. He walked slowly toward Grace's table. Without a word, without the scrape of a chair, he simply stopped in front of her. Grace glanced up, startled. This man was tall, composed, his gaze steady but free of judgment. She opened her mouth, expecting some polite cliché, perhaps a hollow reassurance like, "Don't be sad, he wasn't worth it." But instead, Benjamin lifted his hands, and his hands began to move. Slow, deliberate, steady like a familiar dance. Each motion practiced, each facial expression supporting the gestures. His fingers formed a sentence Grace had never expected to hear from a stranger. "You deserve better." She froze. Her heart hammered, disbelief flickering across her face. Had she read it right? Her eyes widened, breath caught in her throat. A stranger not only saw her, but spoke her language, the very language Brandon had mocked. Shock quickly gave way to something else, a warmth that spread through her chest as if a candle had been lit in a darkened room. Grace pressed her lips together, fighting back the swell of emotion. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her feel this understood. "You?" Her voice trembled. "You know sign language?" Benjamin gave a slight nod, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He lowered his hands and spoke aloud, while signing slowly. "Yes, I learned from my daughter. We use it every day." Grace glanced over. Lucy now stood by their table, clutching the coloring book to her chest, her wide eyes fixed on Grace. "Daddy?" The little girl signed hesitantly, then turned to Grace. "You're so pretty. Why did that man make you sad?" Grace froze. She hadn't expected such an innocent question. In those dark, shining eyes there was no pity, only pure curiosity and kindness. An unexpected smile curved her lips, small but genuine, the first real one of the night. She bent slightly, signing back to Lucy. "Thank you, sweetheart. Sometimes people don't know how to behave. But it's okay. I'm fine now." Lucy smiled, reassured, then turned and clung to her father's arm. Benjamin gave a slight nod, a silent thank you to Grace for answering his daughter so gently. In that moment, Grace felt the cracks inside her being sealed by an invisible glue of understanding. Not from a perfect man, not from flowery words, but from a father, using the quiet language of his hands to give her the recognition she had longed for. Her fingers touched the string of pearls at her neck, her voice low and hoarse as she whispered, "Thank you." Benjamin only smiled, offering no further words, because sometimes the most important things don't require sound at all. Grace was still sitting quietly when the stranger lowered his hands. Inside her, it was as if a new light had been switched on, but at the same time, a wave of awkwardness surged through her. It had been so long since she had allowed anyone to step too close into her fragile private world. The man tilted his head slightly, his eyes sincere. "Would you mind if I sat with you?" he asked slowly, signing each word at the same time to make sure she could follow. Grace hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse. She was too used to building walls around herself to avoid being hurt. But when she glanced over, she saw the little girl clutching her coloring book, offering a shy smile as if waiting for permission. In those clear eyes, there was no judgment, only a wish to share. Grace gave a small nod. All right. Benjamin pulled out a chair, his movement firm yet not intrusive. He sat across from her, with Lucy beside him, her small legs swinging under the table. A waiter passed by, gave them a discreet smile, and was almost relieved that Grace's table was no longer so lonely. You are, Grace began tentatively. Benjamin, he answered, then glanced toward the girl. This is my daughter, Lucy. Lucy sat up straight, raising her hands to sign shyly but clearly. Hello. Grace smiled, returning the gesture. Hello, Lucy. I like your dinosaur picture. The girl's eyes lit up. Do you know what kind this is? She signed quickly, pointing to her clumsy drawing of a long-necked dinosaur. Brachiosaurus, Grace signed back, nodding once. Lucy beamed, her whole face glowing as if a rainbow had burst across it. Benjamin looked at her, a quiet joy flickering in his eyes. A moment later, the waiter returned. Benjamin ordered another plate of pasta for Grace, saying it was the cafe's best, and added a few snacks so Lucy would stay occupied. Grace thought about refusing. She hadn't felt like eating anymore. But faced with Benjamin's natural ease, she let it go. Sometimes letting someone do a small kindness for you was its own kind of healing. When the food arrived, the conversation began to flow more easily. How long have you known sign language? Grace asked. About 3 years now. Benjamin's gaze softened as he looked at his daughter. Lucy was diagnosed with progressive hearing loss when she was 3. That's when I started learning. At first I thought it would be impossible, but then I realized that if I didn't want her to feel left behind, I needed to step into her world. His voice was low, steady, as if replaying a hard stretch of memory. I learned one word at a time, one motion at a time. Many nights I stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning, watching instructional videos and repeating everything in front of the mirror. My hands are stiff, clumsy, but Lucy would always smile patiently. And little by little, we built our own language, silent but full of music. Grace was silent for a moment. A wave of admiration welled up inside her. She knew how hard it was to learn ASL, especially as an adult. Yet here was a man willing to push past every barrier just so his daughter would never feel different. And her mother, the question slipped out before she could stop it. Benjamin paused. Lucy bent her head over her coloring, as if she already knew the answer, but still didn't want to hear it repeated. He drew in a breath, his face tightening. Angela, passed away 2 years ago. Car accident, one ordinary morning. She went out for a run and he trailed off as if the rest of the words were still too heavy to push past his throat. Since that day, it's been just the two of us. The air grew heavy. Grace looked at him, her heart aching. She understood that emptiness. Loss never truly left. It only changed form, sometimes becoming a scar, other times a shadow lurking behind new joys. I'm sorry, she whispered. No need. Benjamin shook his head, his eyes still on his daughter. Angela is still part of us. I tell Lucy about her every day so she'll know that love doesn't disappear. It only changes shape. Grace felt her throat tighten. The man across from her, calm on the surface, carried a mountain of grief. And yet, he chose kindness. He chose to sit here, comforting a stranger, rather than turning away. Lucy looked up, holding out her coloring book with an unfinished page. Will you color with me? She signed, clumsy but eager. Grace laughed, and for the first time that night, the sound was natural. Sure. She picked up a crayon, filling in the outlines beside Lucy's small hand, their fingers brushing now and then. Across the table, Benjamin sat quietly, watching the scene with gentle eyes. Somehow the sharp sting from Brandon's rejection seemed to dissolve. Grace felt herself relax, the child's smile working like medicine, and when she looked up and met Benjamin's gaze, she saw something steady there, a silent promise that no matter how harsh the world could be, there were still hands willing to reach out and catch her. That night, in a cafe filled with rain, Grace laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in a long while. The meal continued with a strange sense of ease. Grace had thought she wouldn't be able to swallow a single bite after everything she had just endured. Yet each spoonful of warm pasta tasted surprisingly good, not because of the food itself, but because of the comforting, gentle atmosphere radiating from Benjamin and his daughter. Lucy quickly became the small flame that melted away all tension. She bombarded Grace with innocent questions, her eyes shining each time she learned a new sign in ASL. "Miss Grace," Lucy signed with trembling but eager fingers, "do you know what my superpower is?" Grace laughed softly, tilting her head. "A superpower, huh? Tell me what it is." Lucy lowered her voice as though revealing a world-shaking secret. "When I turn off my hearing aid, everything becomes silent. No noise, no people yelling. Just me and Daddy, talking with our hands. It's like a secret world no one else knows about." Grace's eyes softened. She placed her hand on the table and signed back. "You're right. That really is a superpower. Do you ever feel like you're in a cocoon, safe and separate?" Lucy nodded vigorously, her messy brown hair bouncing. "Yes!" She grinned brightly, her smile so radiant that it warmed even the nearby tables. Benjamin watched them, a hard-to-describe feeling rising in his chest. He had worried Lucy would never find anyone outside of him who could understand her world. Yet here, in just minutes, his little girl had shared a secret she'd never told anyone else. Grace turned back, her gaze distant, as if remembering her own past. She exhaled slowly, then said quietly, "I used to think that when I lost my hearing, my career as a nurse would end. I thought no hospital would ever hire me because how could a nurse work without hearing well?" Benjamin stayed silent, hanging on every word, unwilling to interrupt. "But then I realized it was that very difference that made me closer to my patients." Grace smiled, though behind it lay a long road of struggle and self-acceptance. Children are often afraid of hospitals. They think nurses and doctors are strangers, cold and distant. But when I take my hearing aids out and show them that I'm different too, they stop being afraid. They laugh when I teach them simple signs. They realize I'm not perfect, and that makes them feel safer. Lucy tilted her head, fascinated. "So, you became a superhero in the hospital?" Grace burst out laughing, the sound louder than anything she had made all night. "I guess you could say that. But superheroes need teammates, and my patients are my little teammates." Benjamin leaned back slightly, his eyes still fixed on her, part amazement, part admiration. He had met plenty of people who tried to hide their pain behind a shiny mask, covering their flaws. But Grace was different. She had turned what others saw as a weakness into a strength, even using it to help others. Something stirred within him, respect, fondness, and perhaps the first spark of something more. Grace didn't notice the look. She was too busy chatting with Lucy, sharing stories about the children in her ward. She told of a 5-year-old boy terrified of getting an MRI. "I showed him my hearing aids and told him I had special machines too. Then I taught him the sign for brave. After that, he sat still, and the scan went smoothly." Lucy gasped, her eyes wide. "You really are a superhero." Grace laughed again, while Benjamin only shook his head. "My daughter tends to make heroes out of people easily." But he looked at Grace steadily, his voice softening. "This time I think she's right." Grace's cheeks warmed, and she started to turn away, but his gaze was too sincere to ignore. She blinked, surprised at the warmth she was receiving from this father and daughter who had been strangers only hours ago. By the end of dinner, Lucy had dozed off on her father's arm, still clutching her coloring book. Benjamin gently laid his hand on her back, then turned to Grace. "Thank you for being patient with her," he said, signing the words along with his speech. "She doesn't usually open up so quickly." Tonight was different. Grace shook her head lightly. "I should be the one thanking you. Because of you two, tonight wasn't the disaster I thought it would be." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, then his eyes lit with a sudden thought. He hesitated briefly before speaking. "Every Saturday, Lucy and I have breakfast at Magnolia Pancake House at 9 o'clock. They make the best chocolate chip pancakes in Burlington." A small smile tugged at his lips. Would you like to join us sometime? Grace froze. The invitation was so simple, so ordinary, that she almost thought she'd misheard. After everything, her heart immediately tried to raise its defenses. But then she looked at Lucy. The little girl was half asleep, yet still smiling faintly, as if dreaming of rainbows and dinosaurs in her secret world. Maybe one breakfast wouldn't be too much. Grace gave a small nod, a second smile spreading across her face that night. 9 o'clock. I'll be there. The next morning, the sky over Burlington still held a few scattered drops from the night's rain, but the air was fresher. Pale sunlight streamed through the windows of Magnolia Pancake House, turning the small room into a warm cocoon amid the busy streets. Grace stood at the entrance, clutching the strap of her purse, her heart racing strangely fast. She wondered what she was doing here. Breakfast with the father and daughter of a man she had just met? Too sudden. And yet the simple invitation from the night before still echoed in her mind, along with the sleepy smile of Lucy hugging her coloring book. She hadn't been able to say no. Inside, Benjamin and Lucy were already seated at a table by the window. On the table lay a thick book about butterflies, its pages filled with bright illustrations. The moment Lucy spotted Grace walking in, she waved enthusiastically as if greeting an old friend. "Miss Grace! You came!" the girl exclaimed, signing at the same time. Grace laughed and hurried over. "I promised, didn't I?" she replied, sliding into the seat beside Lucy. Benjamin took in the sight, the corners of his mouth curving ever so slightly, though his eyes were warmer than any words. "Good morning." Lucy immediately flipped open the book to a page with shimmering orange wings. "This is the monarch butterfly. Daddy said it migrates really far, from Canada all the way to Mexico." Her small fingers signed clumsily but eagerly, and Grace still understood. "That's right." Grace picked up a pencil from the table and quickly drew the correct hand shape for a butterfly. "You place your hands like this, then fold them together. Try it." Lucy copied the motion, her eyes widening before she giggled. "Butterfly!" She flapped her hands in front of her chest, repeating it again and again like an innocent dance. Benjamin watched his daughter, then looked at Grace. He couldn't remember the last time Lucy had learned a new sign so quickly and with such delight. The server brought over 3 plates: chocolate chip pancakes for Lucy, blueberry pancakes for Grace, and a large stack of banana honey pancakes for Benjamin. The smell of butter, melting chocolate, and sweet syrup filled the air around them. "Daddy told me that when he first tried making pancakes," Lucy suddenly began, glancing mischievously at Benjamin, "he burned the pan." "Not just burned," Benjamin groaned, covering his forehead with a hand. "It smoked like a fire alarm. The whole apartment smelled awful." Lucy burst into laughter, nearly tipping over her fork, and Grace covered her mouth before laughing aloud. "You actually burned pancakes? I thought that was the easiest food in the world." "Don't laugh too quickly," Benjamin protested weakly, though his eyes lit up at Grace's laughter. "Try holding a crying 3-year-old in your arms while reading an online recipe and see if your pancakes don't turn to charcoal." Lucy added with eager signing, "After that, Daddy had to buy pancakes from the diner for a whole week." "I got so sick of them." Grace shook her head, a laugh slipping out as lightly as a breeze. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed this much. In that moment, Brandon's shadow from the night before blurred into the background, replaced by a warm picture. An innocent little girl, a clumsy but devoted father, and a breakfast table overflowing with laughter. Lucy proudly showed page after page from the butterfly book. "Miss Grace, this is a swallowtail, and this one is a painted lady. Do you know the signs?" "Not yet, but we can make them up." Grace and Lucy played along, inventing new signs for each species. Benjamin mostly watched in silence, occasionally adding a word or two, but inside him grew something more than just joy. It was a rare feeling, the sense that his family was, somehow, whole again. When he caught Grace's gaze, he saw in it a gentle light reflecting back from his daughter's smile. In that simple morning, he thought, if Angela were still alive, she would be smiling too, seeing how happy Lucy was now. As breakfast wound down, Lucy leaned sleepily against Grace's shoulder, her belly full. Grace gently stroked the girl's hair, startled at how natural it felt. Since when had she, the woman who always kept her distance, begun to feel warmth at letting a child lean on her? Benjamin cleared his throat softly. Thank you for coming this morning. I don't remember the last time Lucy was this excited since her mother passed. Grace started to reply, but instead only gave a quiet nod. She knew sometimes empathy didn't need to be spoken aloud. The three of them left the cafe in the golden morning sun. Lucy clutched her father's hand with one hand and Grace's with the other, chattering on about butterflies as they walked. In that moment, Grace felt something stir inside her, a new, fragile spark. It felt almost like she was walking alongside her very own little family. The narrow road leading away from Magnolia Pancake House gleamed in the morning sun. Lucy had chattered about butterflies until she grew tired and finally fell asleep in the back seat. The car grew quiet, filled only with the steady rhythm of the child's breathing and the silence between the two adults up front. Comfortable, yet edged with tension. Benjamin glanced in the rearview mirror, saw his daughter sound asleep, then turned to Grace. Are you all right? Grace nodded, though her eyes seemed far away. I'm fine. It's just, this morning felt strange, like I stepped into a family that isn't mine, but still felt so familiar. Benjamin gave a faint smile, not quite one of joy, but more like understanding. I felt that too. They pulled up in front of Grace's apartment. She unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't get out just yet. Another silence passed between them until Grace exhaled softly, deciding to let words long buried finally escape. You know, she began slowly, her voice low, my ex-boyfriend left me because he said dating someone with hearing loss was too much trouble. He complained about having to choose quiet restaurants, repeat himself, and explain things to his friends. It was too exhausting. And one day he just told me flat out, "You're too complicated. I need something simple." She gave a hollow laugh, one without joy. And I believed him. I thought I really was a burden. For 2 years, I didn't dare open my heart to anyone again. Benjamin listened in silence, his eyes free of pity, only understanding. Grace went on. Last night, when Brandon said those cruel things, I thought I was going to fall apart. But then, you showed up and signed just 3 words, and I realized maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that I've given the wrong people too much power to define my worth. Her voice cracked at the end, but in her eyes there was strength, not weakness. Benjamin turned his face toward the window, where sunlight glinted off the rain-slicked sidewalk. He drew in a deep breath before speaking. Angela, my wife was the first in our family to learn ASL right after we found out Lucy's hearing would decline. She said, our daughter will never feel different if her language is also our language. He paused, his voice deepening. She died 2 years ago, a senseless accident. I still remember the moment the doctor said, there's nothing more we can do. Grace tilted her head, watching him closely. For a while, Benjamin continued, I thought I'd never recover. But then I saw Lucy, only 4 years old, her eyes red from crying, still signing to me. Daddy, I need you. That was the moment I knew I had to choose love. I couldn't let my daughter grow up in a house filled only with grief. Their eyes met, a long look, needing no words. They recognized the bond between them. Both had suffered loss. Grace had lost trust when she was abandoned. Benjamin had lost his partner in life. Yet both had chosen to rise again, to keep loving instead of drowning in pain. A faint smile touched Grace's lips. Angela must have been a remarkable woman. She was, Benjamin nodded, his eyes shadowed but his voice steady. And I think, if she were still here, she'd be happy to see how much Lucy laughed this morning. Grace slowly nodded, tightening her grip on her purse strap. Inside her, something new was taking root. Trust. It had been so long since she felt safe letting someone see her scars. Thank you, Benjamin, she said softly, for not seeing me as a burden. Benjamin smiled a quiet, steady smile. And thank you for giving my daughter a new friend. In that moment, they both knew. An invisible thread had been tied tighter between them. Not love just yet, but a bond born of shared wounds and the choice to hope anyway. Grace opened the door, but before stepping out, she heard Benjamin's voice behind her. "Would you mind if I texted you? Just to keep the conversation going." She turned back, her eyes shining with a new light. "I'd like that." And so, when the car door shut, a new rhythm began, hesitant texts at first, then longer messages, until their conversations stretched late into the night. From that moment on, they were no longer just two strangers who had met by chance in a rainy cafe. They had begun a journey toward becoming something more. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. The weekend slipped by faster than Grace expected. What had begun as a single breakfast at Magnolia Pancake House soon turned into a routine. By the third week, none of them felt like strangers anymore. At 9 o'clock every Saturday morning, the sunlit window table at Magnolia was almost always taken by three people. A little girl with messy brown hair, a calm father, and a woman with a warm smile. Pancake Saturday. That was what Lucy named their tradition. And with her childlike excitement, she even invented a special sign for it. Both hands spread wide like plates, stacked on top of each other, flipping back and forth like pancakes. Grace laughed so hard at the recipe. "I love it. Let's keep it." And so the three of them had their own sign, a secret code only they understood. After Pancake Saturday, Grace sometimes went grocery shopping with Benjamin and Lucy, or stopped by their apartment. The small third-floor home was simple but cozy. In the living room, Angela's photos still hung in places of honor, her gentle smile, her eyes identical to Lucy's. Grace looked at them with respect, never feeling threatened. On the contrary, it felt as though she were stepping into a story still being told. One rainy afternoon, when the three of them were stuck indoors, Lucy came up with an idea. "Let's build a fort." She dragged out blankets, pillows, and chairs into the middle of the living room. Benjamin chuckled helplessly but went along, while Grace sat on the floor, helping the girl tie corners of blankets to the sofa. When the blanket fort was finished, the three of them crawled inside, squeezed together under the soft, golden glow of a lowered lamp. Lucy giggled, her tiny hands signing. "We're the silent tribe." Grace signed back a new symbol, both hands side by side, moving gently like butterfly wings. "Butterfly friend," she explained, her eyes bright with joy. "Because you love butterflies." Lucy threw her arms around Grace, laughing so hard she nearly knocked her hearing aid loose. "I have a butterfly friend." Benjamin leaned back against the sofa, quietly watching the two girls in front of him. In that simple moment, he felt his heart soften. It had been so long since laughter had filled the apartment. That sound had disappeared with Angela, but now it returned with Grace's presence. Later, when Lucy dozed off inside the fort, her messy hair resting against Grace's lap, the room grew still. Benjamin whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Grace asked softly, careful not to wake the child. "For bringing joy to Lucy. And to me, too." His voice was low, genuine, without a trace of embellishment. Grace hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Honestly, I feel like I've received more. From both of you." Their eyes met in the dim glow of the lamp, and Benjamin realized something had shifted in his chest. It wasn't just gratitude. He liked Grace. He liked the way she spoke to Lucy as if they were equals, the way she turned a flaw into strength, the way she smiled despite a past that had once broken her. He had thought his heart was frozen after Angela's death, but tonight, inside a blanket fort, he felt the ice beginning to crack. Grace looked down at Lucy, gently brushing her hair, unaware that this peaceful moment had become an image Benjamin wanted to hold on to forever. When Grace left, Benjamin walked her down to the stairwell. The rain had stopped, leaving only dampness on the street. He meant to say something more, but in the end he only nodded. "Good night, Grace." "You too," she replied, her eyes carrying a softness that Benjamin held on to for the rest of the night. Back in the apartment, he found Lucy clutching her butterfly book in her sleep, her lips moving faintly around the words, "Butterfly friend." And Benjamin knew his heart was truly opening, piece by piece. One afternoon, after a long shift at the hospital, Grace stopped by the supermarket to pick up a few groceries. She was pushing her cart past the fruit aisle when she heard someone call her name. Grace, is that you? She turned and saw a familiar face, Laura, an old classmate from her nursing school days. They hugged, exchanged greetings, and caught up briefly about work. Laura was as bright as ever, her voice full of energy. I heard you're still in Burlington. The other day I ran into Brandon, remember him? Laura lowered her voice, giving a little smile. He mentioned a date that, well, didn't go so well. But never mind, that's the past, right? Grace's chest tightened. That name was like an old wound being prodded open. She forced a polite smile and ended the conversation quickly. But as she left the store, her hands were still trembling. That whole evening, Grace couldn't shake off the sting of shame. Brandon had spoken of her to someone else, probably in his usual mocking tone. What if Benjamin heard about it? What if he had only pitied her from the start? The thought made her breath catch. In her mind, a decision began to form. Maybe she should pull back. Better not to drag Benjamin and Lucy into the mess of someone branded too complicated like her. The following evening, Benjamin brought Lucy to the hospital for her routine hearing checkup. They had planned to meet Grace for dinner afterward. Grace almost backed out, inventing excuses in her head. But when she saw Lucy's face light up and the girl waving excitedly, she couldn't refuse. At the small restaurant, Lucy eagerly recounted how Grace had taught her the signs for Butterfly Friend and Pancake Saturday. Grace sat beside her, smiling faintly, but inside she was torn. When Lucy skipped over to the dessert counter, Benjamin leaned forward, eyes steady on Grace. What's going on? Since yesterday you've seemed distant. Grace bit her lip. Logic told her to stay quiet, but her heart couldn't bear dishonesty. Yesterday I ran into an old acquaintance. She brought up Brandon. I'm afraid, Anna, that you'll see me as pitiful, weak. I don't want to be anyone's burden ever again. Benjamin was silent for a few seconds, weighing his words. Then he placed his large hand on the table, not touching hers, but close enough that warmth reached across the space. Grace, listen to me. I don't see you as weak. I see you as strong, stronger than most people I've met. You've turned what others call a burden into the power to heal children. You've made Lucy believe that differences are something to be proud of. You are not a burden. You're a light. His voice wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but so honest that it made Grace's throat tighten. Tears welled in her eyes, this time not from hurt, but from the rare gift of being understood. At that moment, Lucy returned, clutching a slice of cake. She plopped down cheerfully, signing clumsily. Daddy hasn't smiled this much since Mommy went to heaven. The innocent words cast a hush over the table. Benjamin blinked, but didn't correct her. Grace looked at him, her heart aching not from sorrow, but from deep emotion. She leaned down, gently hugging Lucy. Thank you for sharing that with me, she whispered. Lucy only grinned, as if it were the simplest truth. When Grace lifted her gaze, she met Benjamin's eyes. In those dark brown depths, she saw something that needed no translation: trust and hope. That night when Grace got home, her phone lit up with a message from Benjamin. I know today was hard for you, but I just want to remind you I see you exactly as you are. And that's the most wonderful thing. Grace sat staring at the screen for a long time, then smiled. She typed back, thank you. Let's talk more. And from then on, their messages grew slowly, steadily, until it was clear they had begun writing a new chapter in both their lives. 3 months passed as if in the blink of an eye. For Grace, weekends that once felt empty were now filled with color. She had grown used to Lucy's giggles every Saturday morning, to the smell of butter and melting chocolate at Magnolia Pancake House, to Benjamin's quiet habit of pouring milk into her coffee, as though he had been doing it for years. On nights when she came home exhausted after late shifts, just opening her phone to see a message from Benjamin, "Have you had dinner? Lucy and I are baking, want to come over?" was enough to revive her completely. And little by little, she felt herself stepping into a small family. No noise, no flashy promises, just a steady, gentle presence that made her once closed heart dare to open again. That night, for the first time in weeks, Benjamin and Grace went out to dinner alone. Lucy had been invited for a sleepover at a friend's house. So excited she nearly forgot to say goodbye before slamming the door shut. She's really happy, Grace whispered as the car rolled forward. Benjamin smiled, eyes fixed on the road. Yes, and she's been happier since you came along. The simple words made Grace's heart flutter. She turned her face toward the window, letting the streetlights reflect against the glass to hide the pink rising in her cheeks. They chose a small Italian restaurant by the lake. Candlelight flickered on their table. Soft violin music played through hidden speakers, and raindrops pattered lightly against the windows. Grace wore a pale blue dress, simple, elegant, her slender shoulders bare. More than once, Benjamin caught his gaze lingering on her face, radiant, fragile, and yet impossibly strong. I like this atmosphere, Grace said softly, swirling the wine in her glass. It's calm, not loud. Feels like the world paused just so we could breathe. I feel the same, Benjamin agreed, his eyes following her every movement. I only wish we had more chances like this. That's all right. Grace smiled faintly, her voice gentler. Sometimes rare moments are the ones that matter most. They spoke of work, of Lucy, of dreams half forgotten. Grace confessed she had once wanted to travel the world, photographing children from different cultures. Benjamin shared his dream of building a playground designed especially for deaf children, where both sound and light were welcoming. They laughed. They grew thoughtful, realizing they shared more than either of them had imagined. On the way back, the car glowed with the dim yellow of streetlights. Neither spoke, but the silence wasn't awkward. It wrapped around them softly, letting them hear the rhythm of their own hearts. Grace sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, eyes gazing out the rain-streaked window. Inside her, a powerful urge welled up. For 3 months, Benjamin had been there, gentle but unwavering. He never tried to change her, never looked at her with pity. He was simply there, a shoulder, a steady hand, a companion. And Grace knew now, what she felt wasn't just gratitude. It was deeper, fiercer, and it was time to speak it aloud. When the car stopped in front of her apartment, Benjamin turned, ready to wish her good night. But before he could say a word, Grace leaned forward, placed her hand on his cheek, and kissed him. The kiss was sudden, brief, but it sent Benjamin's heart reeling. He froze for an instant, then answered her kiss slowly, tenderly, as if afraid of breaking the fragile moment. His fingertips brushed her cheek, lingering, as though unwilling to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Grace's breath came fast, her eyes shimmering in the dim light. She lifted her hands, each movement deliberate and sure. I love you. Every sign carried her whole heart. Benjamin looked at her for a long moment, as if engraving the sight into memory. Then he lifted his own hand, signing back, his deep voice accompanying the words, I love you too. Not because you need someone to protect you, but because you are extraordinary. His voice caught slightly, but his eyes held steady, as though each word was a vow. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, tears clear as the rain outside. She had never thought she would hear such words. Not, you're good enough despite your flaws, but you are worthy exactly as you are. Benjamin leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. You don't need to prove anything to me, Grace. You are enough, always enough. She rested her head on his shoulder, her body trembling with happiness. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the earthy scent of wet ground and the whisper of the wind. They sat in the car for a long time, saying nothing more. Their eyes met, their fingers intertwined, like two puzzle pieces that had finally found where they belonged. When Grace stepped out, Benjamin held her hand once more. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know one thing for certain. From this moment on, I don't want to walk forward without you beside me. Grace smiled through her tears and nodded. Me too. The door closed behind her, but both their hearts remained wide open. Neither slept that night. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages, disjointed, unfinished thoughts. I'm still thinking of you, or I can't believe this really happened. Yet every line was proof. Their love had begun. A love not born from pity, but from respect. Not from empty promises, but from small, simple, genuine moments. And from that moment on, they knew. This wasn't a fleeting spark. This was the beginning of something real. 6 months after that night of confession in the car parked under the rain, Autumn arrived in the city. The maple leaves outside Bluebird Cafe had turned a deep wine red, scattering into small circles on the damp sidewalk. In that moment, Burlington looked like a postcard in Bluebird, for Grace was no longer just a cafe. It was the place where a broken heart had found its steady rhythm again. The place where a man had spoken with his hands the words, "You deserve better." Grace pushed open the door, the warm scent of butter and coffee wrapping around her. Today, the cafe was busier than usual. The silver-haired manager, the same woman who had quietly paid for her dinner that night long ago, smiled and waved. Golden light spilled across the wooden floor. Cups clinked softly and jazz floated like a gentle breath. Grace thought, beautiful, strangely beautiful. But something felt different. The chalkboard menu had an extra line. A.S.L. Night. Love speaks louder than words. In the corner, the band stopped playing. The bassist set down his instrument and adjusted the microphone to eye level, to hand level. On the wall hung a new, oversized photo. A familiar scene, the table by the window. A man standing before a woman, his hands speaking his heart. Beneath it, a line of text, where love speaks louder than words. "Grace!" Lucy came running, her white dress puffed out like a little cloud. She wrapped her arms around Grace's waist, her hearing aids glimmering with butterfly stickers. "You look so pretty today," she signed brightly, her face glowing with happiness. "So do you," Grace answered, signing clearly for her to read her lips. "I love the butterflies on your ears." "Flower girl's gift," Lucy whispered, her eyes suddenly mischievous. She drew in a quick breath, as though afraid she'd said too much, then tugged Grace toward the familiar corner table. The crowd seemed to part, forming a path. Grace stopped short, stunned. Familiar faces appeared everywhere, colleagues from pediatrics, parents who had once cried in her arms when their children stopped fearing hospitals, Benjamin's friends from the construction site, mothers and fathers from the support group for deaf children. They stood smiling, many lifting their hands in ASL greetings. Alongside them was Burlington's ASL community. The gray-haired photographer, the bespectacled college student, the little boy who had once learned the sign for brave in the MRI room. Everyone was here. "What's going?" Grace began, but the lights dimmed. The music fell silent. Only a warm spotlight remained, falling on the old table where a man was standing. Benjamin stepped forward from the golden glow as though stepping out of memory. He wore a white shirt, sleeves rolled high, his calm presence unchanged, but in his brown eyes shone a brilliance Grace had never seen before. He didn't speak. He raised his hands, and Bluebird fell into silence. His fingers moved clear and graceful, like a dance. "I met you here when you thought you weren't enough. But here, you taught me that love is learning the language of the one you cherish. Love is patience. Love is respect." Then his voice came, deep and warm, not overpowering but accompanying the signs like a harmony. "I love you not because you need someone to protect you. I love you because you are extraordinary, because you have turned silence into the most beautiful language in the world." Grace's throat closed. She listened with her eyes, with her heart. The words, even without sound, echoed inside her like a full orchestra. Benjamin gestured toward the manager. She nodded and a string of lights lit up behind him. The photo of the old table faded, replaced by a cream-colored backdrop. A projector flickered on, showing everyday moments. Lucy grinning as she held up a burnt pancake, Grace teaching her the sign for butterfly friend. The three of them bundled under a blanket fort in the living room. A short clip played of an outdoor ASL class, Benjamin clumsily fingerspelling Grace, missing a beat and flushing red, while Grace laughed until she cried. Then a photo, three hands entwined different, imperfect, yet perfectly complete. When the lights came back on, Benjamin was standing in front of her. He dropped to one knee, his left hand pressed to his chest as if to steady his racing heart, his right hand signing slowly, reverently. "Will you marry me?" At the same time, his voice broke softly. "Grace, will you marry me?" The cafe went silent for a single breath, then erupted in a strange, shimmering sound. Applause, but silent. Hands lifted, wrists twirling in the air. Silent applause, fireworks with no noise. Blooming in the golden light. An old woman in the back wiped away tears. The boy who had learned bravery raised his thumb high. Nurses from pediatrics smiled through their own tears. Everyone was saying, Say yes. This is your moment. And then from the circle of people, Lucy stepped forward. She held up a cardboard sign, hand-painted with butterflies and pressed wildflowers. Say yes. I already picked my flower girl dress. Grace burst into laughter through her tears. The sign was almost as big as Lucy, but the girl hugged it tightly, her chin lifted proudly, her hearing aids sparkling like her eyes. Grace touched the pearl necklace at her throat, the one from her grandmother. In an instant, she remembered old hands signing, "You are whole. The right love will speak your language." Every twisted road being called complicated, broken, every night of silent tears, every morning she woke and chose patience again had led her here. She looked at Benjamin. The man kneeling before her wasn't promising to erase all wounds. He had been there when she cried and when she laughed. He hadn't tried to change her. He had learned her language to love her better. And that kind of love, gentle, steady, real, was the very thing she once thought she would never have. Grace knelt too, bringing herself level with him. She lifted his face so he could read her lips, then spoke and signed at once, every gesture like weaving a vow. 1,000 times yes. Laughter burst, mingled with sobs. Lucy jumped up and down, the signboard wobbling dangerously. The manager covered her mouth, crying. Silent applause surged like a wave. Benjamin's hands trembled as he slid a slim ring onto her finger platinum, circling a clear stone, like the first drop of rain in spring. He pulled her to her feet and held her tight. In his arms, Grace listened, not with ears, but with the rhythm of two hearts beating in sync. He whispered into her hair, still signing, "Thank you for teaching me a language no book ever could, the language of patience and courage." Lucy threw her arms around them both, becoming the little clasp that closed the circle. "Family hug," she signed, her voice bubbling aloud. The cafe erupted, but in Bluebird's special way, hands fluttering in the air, smiles wet with tears, heads nodding in quiet joy. Someone had strung tiny butterfly-shaped lights along the wall, blinking like miniature beating hearts. The manager stepped forward, eyes red, and handed Grace an envelope. "I thought tonight was the right time to give this back to you." Inside was an old receipt, dinner free for kindness, and a handwritten note. "When someone makes you feel small, remember, you were seen fully here." In the corner was a clumsy drawing of a butterfly. Grace laughed through her tears. She hugged the woman, then turned and embraced her fiancé again, the word fiancé swelling in her chest like a song. That night lingered longer than most. They ate a tiny cake iced with the word yes. The band played an instrumental tune, slow enough for everyone to sing along. Friends came one by one to hug them, each leaving a different sign. Congrats, love, family, forever. For their little family, a new sign was born that night. 3 fingers interlaced, different, beautiful, together. It would be the way they ended every conversation for years to come. Before leaving, Benjamin paused by the old table, bowing his head as though greeting an old friend. Grace laid her palm on the smooth wood, whispering, "Thank you for saving this place for us." No longer a table for 3, the manager smiled through smudged mascara. From now on, it's a family's table. Outside, the autumn wind blew gently. The streetlights painted soft halos around their shadows. Benjamin held Grace's hand in one. Lucy swung from the other, the 3 of them walking forward not in perfect rhythm, but in harmony, like a story that had found its own beat. Behind them, the chalkboard at Bluebird had been updated, a new line carefully written with both hands. "Where love speaks, hands answer." On a radiant spring morning, the Riverside Park in Burlington looked as if it had dressed itself in festival clothes. Early cherry blossoms bloomed, their fragrance drifting lightly in the breeze, along with the cool scent of river water. On the wide lawn, rows of white chairs were neatly arranged facing an archway, adorned with paper butterflies, the symbol of the journey Grace and Lucy had shared. The guests began to gather. They were not only close family and friends, but also members of the ASL community, children and parents once cared for by Grace, Benjamin's colleagues from the construction site, and families from the support group for children with hearing loss. They had come not just to witness a wedding, but to celebrate a love that rose above the boundaries of sound. Lucy, in a tiny white dress with pearl butterflies sparkling on her hearing aids, skipped happily from one spot to another. In her arms, she proudly carried the hand-painted sign she had once made. Say yes. I already picked my flower girl dress. Each time the guest burst out laughing, she would spin in the grass, her dress fanning out like a little cloud. Music began to play. Not just violin or piano, but something unique, a gentle song, both sung and signed at the same time. Under the arch, Benjamin waited. His deep blue suit made his tall frame look even more steadfast. Yet his eyes were tender in a way that softened everything else. When Grace appeared, her arm linked with a close colleague, the entire lawn seemed to fall silent. She walked slowly down the flower-strewn aisle, her white gown flowing behind her hair adorned with small butterflies. But what made every heart stir was not just her beauty, it was her radiant smile, the smile of a woman who once believed she was not enough, now standing fully in the place where she belonged. When she reached the arch, Benjamin held out his hand. With trembling fingers, she placed hers in his. Their eyes met, and without a single word, everything was promised. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke and signed each word, ensuring that everyone, whether hearing or deaf, could feel included. When it came time for vows, Grace drew a deep breath. She spoke and signed at once, each movement slow, deliberate, so all could understand. You and Lucy saved me on the night I thought I wasn't enough. When I believed I would live forever in silence, you used your hands to tell me 3 words. You deserve better. Now I stand here with a whole heart because I have a family that speaks in the language of love. Her voice trembled, tears shimmering in her eyes. From the seats, hands lifted in silent applause, arms waving gently like ocean waves. Then it was Benjamin's turn. He squeezed Grace's hand tighter, his voice low as his hands moved in unison. Grace, you didn't come to fill a void. You came to expand my heart. You taught me that love doesn't need sound to be heard, that Lucy is not a loss, but a miracle. You turned differences into strength. From this day forward, I vow to choose you every day in silence and in laughter. Many guests broke into tears. A few children looked around in confusion, tugging at their parents' sleeves, asking why everyone was crying. One father bent down, signing gently. These are happy tears. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Benjamin leaned down and kissed Grace softly on the lips. Applause rang out alongside silent applause sound, and silence blending into a single symphony. Lucy leapt up, shouting, "Family hug!" before dashing into their arms. Laughter rippled across the park, and perhaps only Grace felt it most vividly, her heart beating with a new rhythm, stronger and surer than ever before. She had found love not in spite of her difference, but together with it. A love brave enough to listen in silence and bold enough to speak in the language of the heart. 5 years had passed since Bluebird Cafe witnessed that proposal spoken in a silent language that echoed louder than sound. Time might soften the scars of memory, but it only deepened what belonged to love. Now Benjamin and Grace's small apartment was no longer home to just the two of them. In the living room, amid Lucy's butterfly and dinosaur toys, a wooden crib sat by the window. Inside, 2-year-old Marcus kicked and waved his arms, babbling his very first signs. Lucy, now 11, sat beside him, patiently showing her little brother how to sign Cookie. Marcus squealed with laughter, his clumsy attempt only half right, but the entire family burst out laughing anyway. "You're becoming quite the expert," Grace said, scooping Marcus into her arms and kissing the top of his hair. Benjamin leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching. At times he still found it hard to believe that a man who once thought his heart was gone forever could now feel so complete. In the past 5 years, Benjamin had turned his dream into reality. He founded Parents United for Deaf Kids, a community for parents raising deaf children. What began as a handful of families meeting in a living room had grown into more than 50 families, gathering regularly for support sessions, beginner ASL classes, and group outings to show the children they were never alone. Grace had become the health services coordinator for deaf patients at the city hospital. Her job was to bridge doctors and patients, train staff in ASL, and ensure every patient had fair access to information. Parents often came to her afterward, thanking her not just as a nurse, but as a living testament that different does not mean limited. In their own way, this family had transformed loss into a source of strength for an entire community. One afternoon, Grace and Benjamin were invited to Lucy's school for her class presentation. Lucy stood at the front, hair tied back in a high ponytail, hearing aids sparkling under the stage lights. Behind her, the screen displayed bold letters, "Being deaf is my superpower." Lucy took a deep breath, then began both speaking and signing, her voice clear, her hands graceful. Some people think deafness means missing something, but for my family, deafness is what brought us closer. My dad learned a whole new language, so I would never feel like I was different. My mom, Grace, came into my life and showed me that hearing aids don't make me weaker, they make me unique. And because of that, we have a superpower. We talk with our hands, and we love with our hands. The classroom fell silent. Then one by one, her classmates stood and raised their hands in silent applause. Benjamin squeezed Grace's hand tightly. Pride swelled in both of them until it caught in their throats. That autumn afternoon, the four of them returned to Bluebird Cafe. Much had changed. New tables, new artwork on the walls. Yet the old corner table was still there. Fixed onto its surface was a small wooden plaque, engraved with the words, "Where love speaks louder than words." Grace placed her hand gently on the engraving, overwhelmed by emotion. So many years had passed, yet the memory of that rainy night remained vivid. The night a stranger had signed 3 words that changed her life forever. Marcus babbled in his mother's arms, his tiny hands fumbling through the sign for family. So clumsy it made all 3 laugh. Lucy bent down to help him, then carefully showed him the sign her family had created years ago. A combination of different, beautiful, and together. "Family perfectly unique," Lucy whispered, then signed, her small hands fluttering through the air. Benjamin and Grace joined in, their movements fluid and deliberate. Marcus waved his hands in his own toddler way, but to them, it was still the most beautiful sign in the world. In that cafe, they sat together. 4 people, 4 hearts, 4 journeys, but only one family. Not perfect in the usual sense, but complete in their own way. Grace rested her head on Benjamin's shoulder and whispered, "I once thought I'd live my whole life in silence, but it turns out silence is what led me to the most beautiful symphony." Benjamin squeezed her hand, his gaze reflecting the golden sunset streaming through the window. "It's not silence, Grace. It's our language, and it will continue forever." At their familiar table, surrounded by laughter, by signs, and by glistening tears, a complete family had finally found the answer to every doubt. They didn't need to be like anyone else. They only needed to be perfectly unique. Thank you for being part of Soul Stories. If you're listening on another channel, come back to the official home so you can continue our love journeys together with the Soul Stories family.